With the Historical Society. That's the way I got started. I got started as a volunteer some 5-6 years ago, and I'm the chair of this program, and we have evolved a little bit. We're going to be evolving a little bit more, so stay tuned and call us or write us or check us out online if you can, if you'd like to. Okay, now I'm going to introduce Betsy. Betsy Bell is a mother, grandmother, businesswoman, and a longtime justice activist. She was born before World War II in New York City and spent her formative years in the Jim Crow town of Muskogee, Oklahoma. I always wanted to say that.
There you go. You
Yeah,
did it right too.
it's in a song, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
As a Girl Scout, she began her social justice activism working with a biracial team to plan desegregation after the 1954 Supreme Court decision to integrate public schools. Graduating from Bryn Mawr College with a BA in '59 and an MA in '63, Betsy began an academic career in Lawrence, Kansas, where her husband taught. In Lawrence, she advocated for reproductive rights with Planned Parenthood. She has witnessed firsthand the social upheaval created by World War II and the persistent fear of communist power from the USSR and its allies. Reaching across boundaries that separate us from the other has been a constant thread in Betsy's life. Several people have asked me what you meant by the other. I just use my imagination. You'll explain it later,
Yes.
right? Betsy has published 2 short memoirs and several poems in various chapter books and magazines, a personal essay in the Oklahoma Review, a nonfiction piece, Sex, Death, and Line Dancing. Don't you love that combination? In Stratus, is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
University of Washington's Art and Letters publication, and an opinion piece on senior living in the Seattle Times, which I looked up and read and learned about her first that way. Betsy lives in Seattle, where she has held several career positions, interrupted by long residential stays in England and South Africa, where her husband's academic work took him. She's had 2 husbands that have gone on before her, so I don't know, and it doesn't matter to me, but you'll tell us later
Yes.
what you did with whom. For the past 18 years, well, within those 2 husbands anyway. That wasn't in the script. Erase that part.
We're going to be off script a lot.
For the past 18 years, she's lived in West Seattle and says her backyard is still the primary gathering place for 15 young adult grandchildren, all of whom live in the area. She is active with the West Seattle Chamber of Commerce, loves her Tai Chi classes at the Burien Community Center, and thinks she's hiked every trail in Burien and Normandy Park. She also loves Lincoln Park and Schmidt Park and frequents them. I mention these things, she tells me, and I get to choose which to include, because that's how the audience will connect with you sometimes. Betsy worked with the Seattle area faith communities toward economic justice through the Jubilee USA Network. She has traveled extensively. Oh, I said that already. She has traveled sometimes with one of her husbands, or with one or more of her 16 grandchildren, 4 daughters, or 4 stepchildren. She has maintained a direct selling health-related business for the past 30 years and is currently taking another class on character development from the University of Washington for advanced writers, and is well into her next book, a novel. Betsy believes in the power of ordinary citizens to create a positive, inclusive, and just society. Tonight, Betsy is sharing her memoir about her involvement with the anti-nuclear movement called Target Seattle, written in the 80s, or
Well, written about the 80s.
it's called Open Borders, and you've seen copies, and will be for sale later tonight. The book includes several other essays about the reach and influence of Target Seattle during the tumultuous 1980s. Please help me welcome Betsy Bell to you.
Oh, my goodness. Did I give you all that too?
Yeah, well, I found it several places.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, and thank you to the library and to the museum. I think it's just a wonderful opportunity for authors to be able to present their work, and I appreciate all of you for coming tonight. Well, I'm going to start right out by reading from the very beginning of the book, because that will tell you a little bit more why I wrote this book and what it's all about. So 35 years ago, citizens in Seattle stepped up to the threat of nuclear destruction by pushing the Cold War borders open. Leaders, including my husband Alden Bell, organized around a belief that ordinary citizens could influence governments to settle conflicts through diplomacy rather than war. They insisted on travel and trade between enemy superpowers. This period in Seattle's history coincided with my own personal efforts to open the constraining borders of my career and my marriage. Throughout my long partnership with Don, we were married for 35 years before he died, I struggled to shed my role as student, never sure of my particular value in our relationship. He had been my teacher when I was 17. So through the examination of a period of intense political activity in my life, I have been able to trace my passage to independence. Mine is the story of many women born during the World War II era and raised at a time when the prevailing expectation was of women in America was that they would marry, raise children, and be a supportive wife. In spite of my parents' encouragement, I wanted to, and they felt I could do anything I wanted to in life. They encouraged me. But the 50s model of a supportive wife, to which Don and I both aspired, curbed my independence. So this book is about a woman, middle-aged woman, wife and mother, who finds herself in the middle of a world threatened by nuclear destruction. And the thing that, and then the reason I got involved in this whole thing was because my husband got chosen to be the head of an organization called Target Seattle. Now maybe some of you guys were around in the 80s and remember some of this. Anybody in the room remember Target Seattle in 1982? Okay, so what happened was this is a new, different way to do this. The nuclear submarine came into Puget Sound in August of 1982, and Seattle was really kind of a backwater. Before that time, we were under the radar. Washington, D.C. was over there running everything. And then we suddenly discovered that we were at ground zero. And right now there are 8 of these deployed. Each one of them has the capacity to destroy the Earth. They're right here, 20 miles from here. So this was, our children were doing duck and cover in the school, in their schools. Any of you did duck and cover when you were young enough to remember doing, yeah. There were signs like this on the buildings downtown. I discovered this because recently there's historians all over Seattle, and somebody was out looking for phantom signs, ghost signs left over from a previous era. And this is one that's left. But this was literally on all the downtown concrete buildings in 1982. I mean, it just, so we were all quaking in our boots. It was brand new. I had one interviewer say, well, I grew up with the threat of nuclear war over my head. And we've all become kind of inured to this because it's a real and present situation, and we like to think it's not really going to happen. But for us, it was brand new. And recently, when President Trump and Kim Jong-un began taunting each other about the size of their red buttons, poised to launch a nuclear strike, I thought it was the propitious moment to write the story of Seattle's reaction to the heightened threats of nuclear war. So that's why it appeared when it did. That's why I decided to write this. So I thought maybe our story from the 80s would be interesting to today's reading audience. People started asking, if Seattle is a target, what could we do to keep the bombs from falling? Well, I'm not sure who really began this response, but there was the prevailing idea was President Reagan's, and he just followed on with some people before him, and it was a peace through strength, military buildup. And the sense was that people in Seattle needed to at least understand all the different possible ways to end the threat of nuclear war. So a group of people from various agencies, the Downtown Y, Physicians for Social Responsibility, plowshares, lawyers, they got together at a wonderful home owned by Kay Bullitt, who is the Bullitt family. Come on in. Just come right on up to the front here. And so they met in the living room and they started talking, what can we do, what can we do? And they decided to have a huge public education event. And it started with that first slide there was with the Paramount Theater. And the line is falling on the stage and the top Mennonites on the stage. And the final event, Helen Caldecott, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yes, I got to show you pictures. And this was the newspaper story article about it. And these people, this is what really got me excited. These two people are a part of a mime team that did a thing called 4 Minutes to Midnight. Does anybody remember watching these people act? I was working at the cathedral, Episcopal Cathedral at the time, and I had them come and do a program there, and it was a stunning experience to have that. So at the Kingdom event, remember the Kingdom?
Oh, yeah.
So Helen Caldecott was the keynote speaker. Helen Caldecott is the pediatrician from Australia. She's still alive and well. She really started the International Physicians for Social Responsibility. And she was amazing to listen to her talk because she described what happens to the human body with a nuclear radiation. And it was so vivid and so real, and it just like, yeah, it got us pretty excited. So while all these educational events were going on, some very good friends of mine decided to write a love letter to the people who live in Tashkent, which is Seattle's sister city in Uzbekistan. And this letter was written both in English and in Russian. And here's a picture of it. And it was taken around to every event. And into children's classrooms, there are block letters and marginal drawings of mushroom clouds and peace signs. And one little girl said to her kindergarten teacher, well, I'm not afraid of nuclear bombs falling because my daddy goes to a meeting every week to keep them from coming down. So this is the effect of people who were involved in this preventing nuclear war educational event. Their children were aware that they were taking some action and believed, like Ali, that their father was going to be able to take care of it. So we got a lot of copies of this letter. And after the first talk at Seattle, we were sitting around in Kay Bullitt's living room with these mounds of paper all over the place. And how are we going to get them to Tashkent? Well, just let me read a little bit from that about that. This is kind of fun to listen to it. Okay. The organizers, let's see where I got it. Someplace here. The committee had all these, and 42,000 people, grade school children, and so on. Now, when this all ended, an attempt failed to have other travelers to Tashkent take them. Oh, well, okay. The bottom of each letter, it said, right down here at the bottom, this letter will be sent to Seattle's Russian sister city, Tashkent, will be sent to Seattle's Russian sister city, Tashkent, and to government officials of the Soviet Union and the United States. Well, we laughed when we talked about mailing them, imagining the boxed up letters sitting on the mayor of Tashkent's desk, how he'd marvel at the sentimentality of Americans as his colleagues looked over his shoulder. Then we figured he'd throw the whole mess in a dumpster behind the office buildings. That is, if the boxes ever got to Uzbekistan. So after an attempt failed to have other travelers to Tashkent take the letters, we decided to take them ourselves. So this story begins with my husband and me packing our suitcases and having a big argument about 2 secret letters to refuseniks that if they had been discovered on our bodies, we would have been probably put in jail. So that increased the risk considerably.
What are refuseniks?
Refuseniks is the name that came to be called the Jews in the Soviet Union who wanted to immigrate to Israel would apply for an exit visa, and then once they got their exit visa, they wouldn't be allowed to actually go. They were pawns in the back and forth discussion between the Kremlin and the White House about trade agreements, about arms, about open borders. We could not fly directly into the Soviet Union at that time. There was a Jackson-Vanik law against that, or whatever you call it. So we had to go to Helsinki first and then get in an airfloat plane. And so this discussion, the Jews were being held hostage to this. And many of them were highly educated people who were doctors and professors and so on, and they had no work. Many times they were begging food, and there was one incident where someone went to the Soviet Union to actually meet some refuseniks. When he got to their house, where he thought it was, the number had been painted out. I mean, we were doing something. No one else in our group knew about it except for our photographer. And it was a risky business, I have to say that. So, now, we took ourselves very seriously. We're going to go there and be peace. We're going to take our letters, and we had Soviet experts come and talk to us and explain what we could say and what we couldn't say, and we shouldn't ever give our opinion to anybody. When they asked it, and then we were there as ordinary citizens, not as representing our government at all. So I just want to describe how it felt to get to Moscow. I hardly slept that first night. At dawn, I got up and walked to the window to peer out the curtains. White-headed ravens cawed from the stone windowsills 4 floors above the frozen March earth. Just like right now, right? The front drive was now covered with a thin blanket of snow. Beneath a flat, steel gray sky, a lone man ran beside the hotel in a private wooded garden. I wished I'd brought my running shoes, but suspected the track was exclusive to members of some inner circle. After Don woke up, we joined our groggy group downstairs in the hotel for breakfast before planning our visit to the Soviet Peace Committee. The smell of burnt coffee and sulfurous odor of overcooked eggs suppressed hunger until, one by one, we discovered the buffet of kielbasa sausage and blinis, and serniki, fried quark pancakes with sour cream, jam, and honey toppings. The drafty room had no decoration other than large black silhouettes of Lenin and red hammer and sickle cutouts. Fluorescent lights cast an institutional pall over our hunched shoulders. Between bites, we wrapped our arms in self-warming hugs. As the coffee and food re-energized us, conversation swelled to laughter. The exclamations about drippy faucets, ceiling tiles from which contraband Playboy magazines tumbled, and the sleep-defying caws of the white-mantled ravens. We were in Moscow behind the iron curtain. So I want to just drop back for a second and get you guys situated in the Cold War. This is the last 10 years of it. So in the course of my work and presenting this book to the public, I got acquainted with Professor Eric Johnson at the University of Washington, who's in the history department. And he's actually had me come and talk to classes. In fact, I'm going in March. You know, the artifact from the Cold War. The living artifact. So I asked him if he would help me with my very first book presentation at the University of Washington bookstore by giving a little slide presentation of the Cold War, because my first radio interview was with Marge Tisdale. Did anybody get Radio Vashon? Anybody ever listen to Radio Vashon? Well, I was interviewed by an interviewer for Radio Vashon, and she stopped me in the middle. Turns out she's my daughter's age, and she said, "Oh, the Cold War, I don't remember. Tell me about the Cold War." So, in case there's anyone in that crowd here tonight, here, the Cold War, come on now. There we go. This is a picture of 1945, the end of World War II, when the Soviet and the American troops were congratulating each other for defeating the Axis powers. This is the Elbow River, famous photograph of the Elbow River. Within 6 months, George Kennan is saying the Soviet Union cannot be trusted. They want to expand their borders. They're totally expansionist. We have to contain them. And then a few months after that, come on. Oops, one too far. How do I do that? How do I go back? Oh, over here. Gotta show you this guy. This is Nikolai Novikov. He's the Russian ambassador to the U.S. And his famous remarks were, the Americans can't be trusted. What they want to do is contain the Soviet Union, and they want to rule the world. So the détente between the two countries who fought side by side to defeat Hitler was gone in just like that. This is what the world looked like at the height of the Cold War. This blue, and you see how we didn't just take care of ourselves. We went over and took all of Europe. This is one of the things that's going on right now in the conversations. We have nuclear warheads in most of Western Europe pointing at the Soviet Union. And the breach that they did under Obama, when Obama was president, was to begin to build short-range missiles for retaliation, or who knows, for a strike. So when the Union of Atomic Scientists, back in 1947, these are the people who helped to make the bomb in the first place. Right away they became concerned about the use of nuclear weapons, and they set this clock called the Doomsday Clock at 7 minutes to midnight. I just read a long article about what's happened to that clock. At the end of the Glasnost period, when Gorbachev and Reagan, then the START Treaty was established, it went all the way down to 17 minutes before midnight. And because we really did disable a lot of nuclear weapons. Probably 75% of the things that had been in place were destroyed or disabled. And so that was good. But you know what happened just in January this year? 2 minutes to midnight. The reason this actually didn't change from last year, so maybe that's a good thing. But what they're saying is it's the destabilizing democracy because of the media, social media, and the use of media to destabilize governments and democracies is one of the reasons that it's become more alarming. So 2 minutes to midnight is kind of scary. Now, I wanted to show you on this first slide, that's Coretta Scott King leading the Women's March Against Nuclear Weapons in 1963. And this is a group of people in Schenectady in 1960. So we had some demonstrations back in the 60s here in Seattle. But I wasn't paying attention to any of that. It wasn't until this going along just as Don's wife to Russia that got me kind of excited. So what happened, anyway, that takes care of the Cold War. Now, okay, so we get to the office of the chairman of the Peace Committee. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was scary. As we filed in, Vladimir guided Virginia and Don to the head table. Masha, I have to show you a picture of Masha. This is Masha. She's the Russian student who's lived many years in Russia, and she was at the university in the Jackson School, and she was Don's right-hand translator. So she was picking up nuances, facial nuances, body posture, and making sure that, come down here, Becky. Okay, yeah. So anyway, to go on and tell you what it was like to walk into that room with this guy, it is It was our turn to meet Yuri Zhukov, the chair of the Soviet Peace Committee. He and his subordinates stood to welcome us in the way a school principal greets naughty children sent by an exasperated teacher. It was this meeting that worried Herbert Ellison, the head of the Jackson School at the University of Washington. He had told Don we were tilting at windmills and might undermine the official strategic arms reduction treaty negotiations between the USSR and the US towards warhead parity, led by General Edward Brownie. The US State Department had not been happy to grant us visas, but agreed to do so since we claimed tourist status. As we filed in, Vladimir, our official guide, put Virginia and Don on the head table. Masha took a seat next to Don. Ruth and I joined the others along the sides of the open horseshoe table. I was dry-mouthed and nervous for Don. I picked up the headset in front of my place, poured myself a glass of water from one of the carafes, and took a sip. My stomach tightened when I heard Chairman Zhukov's first question, "Do you speak for your government?" Now, a week before we went, Reagan had met at the Evangelical Christian Caucus breakfast and uttered, "They are an evil empire." So this was what we walked into. The Peace Committee, "Do you speak for your government?" Choosing his words carefully, speaking slowly so the simultaneous translation could follow, Don answered, "We are a group of private citizens from Seattle, Washington, en route to visit our sister city, Tashkent. Our objective is to deliver copies of a friendship letter signed by our citizens intended for the people of Tashkent." So that was how he handled that one. Now, let me catch up with myself here. And here, again, here's a picture of Don and Masha. She was invaluable help to us. She plays the guitar beautifully and sang Russian songs, and at any opportunity she was just, any of the Russians who were around us were just melting because of her. So this is the shot of, I should have given a little more preparation for this picture. We went to Tashkent. Finally we got to Tashkent. And in Tashkent, we took our peace petitions in the suitcase, and on the morning of going to the public market, everybody had their little manila envelope full of letters. And we got out of the subway and walked into the public market, and we just started handing these out to people. And it was pretty amazing what happened. I could describe it to you a little bit, because it just was a lovely, where did I put that? Okay. We were greeted by a row of adorable 5-year-olds who had big red bows in their hair, white bows in their hair, and little red coats. We felt like we were a star. All right, so here's the picture of the market square. Filled with people, open air was ringed by tables of melons, all colors and sizes, vegetables, bags of rice, wheat, corn, beans, chilies, more fruit, plastic combs, hair gadgets, pens and tablets. Vats of sputtering cooking oil brimming with spices and garlic got me sneezing. People hawked their wares in melodious phrases punctuated by guttural consonants quite far into my ear. A child darted between our legs, pursued by a shrill older sister. Orange, yellow, and red geometric designs of silk cloth of traditional women's dresses filled the square. Dark eyes fringed in flowered shawls or simple headscarves stared at us. Each of us carried our manila envelopes. We began approaching shopkeepers, children, passers-by with copies of the letter, tentatively hesitating before our advance, because it is against the law for anyone to pass out any kind of paper propaganda of any kind in Russia at that time. We watched one person after another accept the offering and stand still to read the Russian words. Our two nations must work together to create peaceful means of resolving conflicts and take steps to reduce the danger of nuclear war. You asked about other. These are the other. These people approaching us to take our letters from us, and the ones that we call an evil empire. One of us handed a letter to a group of construction workers taking a tea break. These men had the broad round faces and high hairlines and blue eyes and ruddy skin of Russians, not the dark Turkic appearance of the merchants. Several of the workers read over the shoulders of one reading out loud. They looked at us, surprised to have strangers, foreigners, handing out such a message. They approached us, hands reaching for more copies, big smiles on their faces, even a few tears. One boy on a bicycle sped away and came back moments later. Let's see if I can get him up in front of you. With three more boys, their mothers panting to catch up. All wanted letters. A young girl brought sweets to several people in our group, asking to exchange them for more copies. This went on for a while, and finally there were several police, and they said, can't do this anymore. So we basically didn't ask permission, we just did it and asked forgiveness. And the next day, in the mayor's office, the deputy mayor, the first thing she said was to Virginia, for years we've been waiting for you to come. I lost both my sons and my husband in the war. I don't want to lose my grandchildren. And then she said, you are not allowed to pass out those letters. Give them to us and we will do it for you. So that was the end of that. Come on now, there's some chairs up here.
Oh, it's okay, thank you.
Okay. So it was quite an experience to be in Tashkent. What is this saying? Unable to box. What's happening here? Let me see if I can. Oh. Okay, here we go. This picture. Yeah, now next. The next day in Tashkent, the newspaper was full of us. In Russia, the Russian newspaper was full of our experience. This is all people in our group were reading the newspaper. Now, we went to the mayor's office and we were surprised for the big reception and the gift giving, and that usually happens with these delegations. And we walked into the main room and discovered a big interlit cabinet full of Seattle paraphernalia. I mean, they had carvings, Salish Sea carvings, and documents, and other gifts that other people, because our sister city relationship started in 1973, and in spite of all of the Cold War activities, it was steady on because it was about commerce and about cultural exchange, never about politics. And it's still going today. I got an email today inviting me to the annual I've forgotten what it's called, but it's the annual Uzbek event here in Seattle, celebrating our sister city. And I went to a meeting not long ago, and there's young Russians and Uzbeks who have immigrated to the United States who are now taking the reins of this organization, which is just lovely. There's a couple of Uzbeks in the Seattle City Hall who are the members of the current staff people to the Seattle Tashkent Sister City Committee. So when we went, there were only 5 pairings of sister cities with the Soviet Union. And one of my goals, one of my independent producing goals, was to take the slideshow that resulted from this and try to get more in sister city relationships going with the Soviet. By 1989, there were 25 sister cities in the Soviet. Whether I had anything to do with that or not, I have no idea, but it was one of the things I wanted to do anyway. So when we got home, there was a huge, I have to say one more thing, one more picture here. So Don was speaking to the mayor. This is a really important thing to share with you because it's such a profound example of what can happen when you recognize the other for who they really are. Let's see if I can find this place here. Okay. Now, the mayor began the formalities with a warm welcome speech. Marlowe snapped pictures. Don stood to make his remarks of gratitude. for our reception and to the stated purpose of our trip. We have come to ask you, the citizens of Tashkent, to join with us to encourage our governments to avoid nuclear war so that our children and our communities will thrive in mutual friendship for generations to come. Now, as I watched him speak, I noticed his open blue eyes, careful goatee, his lean face, average height, and slim waist. And he's standing right in front of, guess who? The most favored man in all of Russia, Lenin. And they look exactly alike. It was, and everybody else noticed the likeness as well. Now, after speaking, Don handed the mayor an unrolled poster, the copy of the letter, that now is written in 3 languages. Days before our departure from Seattle, someone had the idea of printing the poster in Uzbek, as well as Russian and English. We had to send it all the way down to UCLA to get a press that had the capacity to do an Uzbek print. You know, this is way before the computers were doing these things. The mayor passed the poster on to his deputy, and with our really looking at it, and proceeded with the presentation of the gifts. Seconds later, the staffer, having read the poster and discovered the Uzbek translation, tugged at the mayor's sleeve, interrupting the proceedings. He pointed to the letter in Uzbek. You have to remember, many of the official people in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan were Russians. They were sent there to manage, you know, to keep the USSR in place. And people weren't allowed to practice their religion, and where they wouldn't have been wearing the hijab or any of those things, even though they were Muslims. However, many of the staff would have been Uzbek speaking at home, not Russian speaking. All children had to learn Russian, but their home language, their secret home language, was still in Uzbek. So the staffer interrupted the proceedings. He pointed to the letter in Uzbek, Cyrillic script with slight differences. The mayor took the poster in both hands and shushed the crowd. You've got a big table here with all kinds of sweets and things, and you got the Uzbeks on one side and the Americans on the other side. The mayor took the poster in both hands, shushed the crowd. Their ethnicity had been acknowledged. He began to read to the assembly in Uzbek. Smiles spread on every face. The Uzbeks looked at each other and stood to reach across the tables, grinning broadly, gold and silver steel teeth gleaming. They were thanking us for recognizing them, people living under the reach of the Soviet Union, but not Russian. It was a really profound moment, and just the sort of subtlety. Now, we had a lot of fun in Tashkent. There was parties. Here's Don dressed up in Uzbek clothing, dancing with, you know, I mentioned the color, the dress colors earlier in my reading. So, and then we went on to Samarkand, where it's so beautiful. And this is an imam. There was one mosque functioning there, saying that peace is the main theme of the Quran, and the letter he's got there is our Target Seattle letter. So it was just really, and then we went on to Leningrad, and in Leningrad we mailed the 2 secret letters to the refuseniks the last night before we got on the airplane. Don was afraid to mail them any sooner than that because he was nervous that they would trace the letters. So we got home, and the thing I wanted to do more than anything was tell our members of Congress what I had experienced. So I was going to Washington, D.C. for something else anyway, and I just went. And I knocked on the doors of Slade Gordon and Jackson, Scoop Jackson, and Joel Pritchard, who was the West Seattle representative at that time. And then there was Mike Lowry. When I got to Slade Gordon's office, first of all, Scoop Jackson would have nothing to do with me. No, we were peace through strength, that's it. In Slade Gordon's office, he handed me off to a young aide who toed the same party line. The look of disbelief on his face and his remarks stayed with me. They, the Russians, want what we have. There isn't enough to go around. We have to protect our resources from them. So I went looking for the basis of all that, and here, people, is the picture of the Monroe Doctrine. Remember old Monroe, the president, whatever he was, 1918 something or other, 38 or something? Big stick, with his big stick. He said, no one, we can't, Spain, France, Germany cannot come to the Western Hemisphere. We own it. And this has been our foreign policy pretty much ever since then. And this is what I got from Slade Gordon's office, and from only when I got to my wonderful Mike Lowry did I get. He brought out his whole staff, got his big round table out and says, Betsy, tell us about it. And I was just, yeah. So later, when I got the slideshow, and Marlo got this slideshow done, I went back and he arranged, and Joel Pritchard, bless his heart, also helped him for a showing in the Capitol Rotunda of this slideshow. And a bunch of aides came out, probably 20 people came to watch it, but it was that became my cause to do that, to make that slideshow. So the subtitle of this book is Open Borders, a personal story of love, loss, and anti-war activism. The love and the loss, I'll just mention briefly. You have to read the book. Marlo was only 25 when he contracted a very rare cancer and died. Marlo is the photographer who went with us. He had been, here, come on, Beth. There he is. Marlo Boyer, the son of a National Geographic photographer, wonderful man. He applied for the Rhodes Scholarship, and Don sat on the Rhodes Scholarship selection committee, and he didn't make it, but Don was very impressed with him and his abilities, and asked him if he would join us on this trip and take pictures. So, and the refusal letters were rolled up inside camera canisters. That's how we got away with them. They were tucked inside his big camera bag. So Marlo, this was he wanted to create this thing so that we could take it around the country. And I was pushing him. You can't cause anybody else to get sick, no. But I had this, if you read the book, you'll see I have a slight feeling of guilt around the fact that he worked so hard day and night, sitting in this squatted position on a stool, with this light table, arranging all his slides and putting this thing together. So he died at age 25. And then my husband got fired from his deanship at the University of Washington with no explanation, but we've always thought it was probably because he was involved in all this extracurricular activity. And he developed a leukemia and died here's the medicine was hard in the second round of chemotherapy. The medicine was harder on his body this time than the previous round. He lay depleted from the killing drugs as we crowded his hospital room to watch the election returns. A fellow Rhodes Scholar, Bill Clinton, won. Don was too far away in his own cancer-fighting world to cheer with the rest of us. A few days later, his medical team confessed there was nothing left to do for him. Don asked to be unplugged from all their machines and taken home. The word spread fast that Don had come home to die, the house filled with well-wishers. The girls and I stayed upstairs in the master bedroom, talking, telling stories, comforting Don. He had come home with 20 morphine tablets, refusing to take any so he could be present as one by one students, colleagues, fellow citizen activists, and church members entered the room, sat by his bed, and thanked him for his particular gifts to them, encouragement, leadership, inspiration, knowledge. I had the difficult task and let this wake roll on without my supervision. I had promised to help Don take his own life. So, here the two of us are. That is me, yes it is. It's a long time ago. Yeah, and so since Since writing this book and coming up for air to see what's going on around the world, I have gotten very, very involved with the Physicians for Social Responsibility. And the organization has gained new strength in the last 5 years. We are now in Washington State the most active Physicians for Social Responsibility group in the whole United States. There's a coalition of Washington Against Nuclear Weapons that has 41 member organizations. I have some postcards back there if you would like to. Our own Adam Smith, along with Elizabeth Warren, have just put new legislation in the hopper. We need phone calls to Pramila Jayapal to encourage her to co-sponsor. It's a no first use bill. And it's the same in the Senate and in the House. So take those postcards home with you. If you want to sign them, I will collect them. But it gives you a script on the back. You can just take them and read the script. Call Pramila or whoever. We're all in Pramila's, aren't we? Everybody here. If you know people in other parts of the country, call them up and get their senators and their representatives to co-sponsor. We want a no first strike. So they've got me on the task force now, and I've been really having I never expected to step back into an activist role again. I was just going to get my pen and write. But there we go. So here, this is a shot of the nuclear weapon. So I don't know, you guys, the snow has been wonderful. I went walking in Schmitz Park and saw all these families and their little children who normally would be in daycare. And I had a strange experience with this. First, the beauty of it, these families and their children, and then the sadness. I'm 81. These children will be 81. We are in the middle of a great extinction. Half of the creatures we know on the planet will be gone by the time they reach my age. So what Physicians for Social Responsibility is all about is preventing what you cannot cure. So there are 3 arms. One is the environment, one is nuclear weapons, and the third, which they've just adopted, is income inequality. So my own feeling is I feel more empowered facing the sadness. And I think grieving is an active part. It's much better to grieve what we're losing than to just pretend it isn't happening. Because grieving, out of the grief of seeing these families and just smiling and it was just beautiful because, California Street was full of families. And normally fathers wouldn't be holding their babies, they'd be in daycare or something. So hold this beauty and at the same time grieve the loss that these families are going to experience as they grow older, and then pick up the pen or the phone and do one small thing to see if we can't reverse. One of the things that's kept me going is I'm not attached to the outcome. You do the thing that you feel called to do, but let the outcome take care of itself. And because does that make sense? So thank you very much for listening, and any questions? Questions about Cold War, about anything, about the process?
I just wanted to know if you know of movies that have been made maybe about the Cold War, because you're right, the younger generations know nothing of.
That's a really good question. I don't. That is a really, really good question. I should look that up. No.
Sorry, we can.
I watched one, you remember no, I really don't. No.
Maybe the library.
Yeah.
Is it Dr. Strangelove?
Dr. Strangelove was in the Cold War. Did everybody ever see Dr. Strangelove? That was terrifying. Yeah. Apparently, the day after was, got a lot of families all scared in the 80s. That came out, I think, in 83 or something like that. But that, and what was the bridge where they exchanged the guy who got shot down, the Air Force pilot, and it was, oh, we're gonna make a mess of it.
The U-2,
It was that,
the U-2 incident, the flyover of.
Gary Powers.
yeah, Gary Powers. There was a wonderful movie. Tom Hanks played the lawyer who was going after the negotiator. Yeah, that was a terrific movie.
Is that what it was called, The Negotiator?
I don't know, I just know the name of the plane, but
just
it's
Google
like.
it.
Well, yes, it was one of those planes that got shot down behind enemy lines, and they did a trade of spies for him, Powers. That was a good movie. I don't know. You have to. That's a really good thing. Do you know any good other good books or anything like that? Okay. Any more questions, comments?
Where would you get one of those signs that you had in your previous slide about Washington against
Nuclear weapons?
nuclear weapons?
There, where you get the sign?
Right,
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to find out. Would you like one?
I would. The submarine goes right by my house on the canal.
All right. Would you, can you, I have a little piece of paper. You could probably give me your name and your contact information and a little note. Probably.
Wonderful talk, thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a question about these nuclear submarines, because I remember that when I was young, and my dad was working at Lockheed, and we got into these big debates over these. When you say they can destroy the Earth, like, what can they do?
They have 8, let's see, I can't remember, it's something like 12 nuclear bombs on each one of those things. And then more in the bay that they could put in place. And each bomb, I don't have all the statistics, but if something fell in downtown Seattle, we would feel it in West Seattle. And so basically, if all the firepower over there was destroy the Earth, that's a little exaggeration. It would be a big destruction, however.
Yeah.
Not as big as the asteroid coming that destroyed all, you know, the dinosaurs and all that. But
Yeah. No,
It's-
it's interesting, I just.
should I make it less scary?
No, I just, it's just more, I forgot they were still here.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when they go by,
We've all forgotten they're still here.
they close the canal bridge, and they put 8 highway patrolmen on each side of the bridge. And my gardeners were down on the water, and the guys on the submarine came out with machine guns. And my guys had shovels.
Really? This, that happened?
It's good thing we had shovels and not hammers and sickles to finish.
Yes, yes.
So, and just to clarify, you said that there are 8 of those just right here in Seattle?
Deployed. They're active, like in active duty.
And so are there like more right outside of San Francisco and LA?
There's
Do you know
a-
how many along
there's
the
a-
west coast?
No, we have I think we have the West Coast covered. Then there's one in Norfolk, Virginia, at the naval base there, has another 8. Yeah. By the way, people, page 2 books from Burien are here tonight. I really, I could have just brought my books and sold them to you directly, but I really like supporting the local bookstores, and I want that, and so they'll be handling any sales that happen, and I'd be glad to sign anybody's book. And tell your friends, yeah.
So it was the Bridge of Spies.
Bridge of Spies, thank you.
Yeah.
Somebody came up with that.
What is
Bridge
it?
of Spies.
Spies.
Bridge of Spies. It is a Cold War movie. Yeah, very, very good.
I wanted to make one other comment too. In addition to, well, the 2 things, with those submarines in our waters, makes us a more attractive target
Yep,
to the other nuclear equipment that
Exactly.
we have on our Earth.
right.
And in addition to that, I'm not an activist yet, but I care a lot about the environment and what the other crap we're doing to our earth.
Yes,
Not just nuclear
Right.
scares, but other real physical things that are affecting our children and our world that we're
Exactly.
leaving to our children and grandchildren. And Washington State, maybe the United States, has never been very good, I'm not quoting anybody with this, with prevention money. In general, our world will pay for prisons and pay for cleanup and so forth, but will not invest money in prevention.
Yeah.
And so I support all that you have done and the ideas that you're giving us. I don't know if there are very many people in the 2019 that are activists in the way you were? Or is that kind
there
of a
are a
lost
lot of
art?
people, there are a lot of doctors and nurses who are very, very active. I decided to go back, I just wanted to see who my allies were, so I went back to the National Awards event for the PSR in Washington DC. I was on November 8th, and I was stunned by the crowd there. Very well, it's a very well-heeled organization. There's lots of money in doctors and nurses, and they are working very hard on, our legislation, that's Adam Smith wrote that legislation with the help of PSR people, and it is the first legislation. So we're hoping that it just sweeps across the country to get this going.
I remember hearing you talk one time, and you talked about when you went down to Tacoma with another older activist woman, and you were bemoaning about how young people aren't in the streets.
Yes.
And what was it that she said to you?
I don't remember.
It was something. Cute. No, but it was something about reassuring you that the young people today are mobilizing,
Oh, yeah.
are acting,
Yes.
but in ways that are different than how we
That's
remember back then.
exactly, that was, Ann Stadler was saying that. She's the person, there's 4 essays in this book, and one of them is by Ann Stadler, who worked for King Television and helped to put on this space bridge where there were audiences in Leningrad and audiences in Seattle, and they could see each other. Simultaneous translation. It took a whole minute for the signal to get to the other side, so it was a lot of delay. But she said, the young people are working on this, they just have different methods. They're engaged electronically.
Mhm.
One of the things I say in my book is, it's time for us to just put our thumbs to the side and actually talk to each other about this issue, because we can send out a bunch of emails and think we've done our thing for the day. And I don't think people still respond to the personal touch. But no, she's pretty clear that she thinks that there's a lot of action in the young people. There's been a big study about the way people feel about nuclear weapons, and it's across the board. It's people of color, women, every economic group that are worried about this, but just not talking about it very much. I can see on faces in this room that it's really uncomfortable to talk about this, because we have the wonderful capacity as humans to put aside things we just cannot handle. It's our protective mechanism, because it could keep you awake at night. And you don't want that. You need to sleep so that you can get up and do the thing the next day. Yeah, Becky.
I don't know if really it's not saying anything or holding back, or just a shift in the mentality about the whole situation. Because what I've noticed, in our day, it was about fear. It was
Yes,
all about fear.
right.
And so when you use the word weapons, right there, it's a question of war and
Yeah.
harm and violence and all that. Whereas it seems to me the young people today are much more conscious about the whole thing. They don't talk about nuclear weapons, they talk about nuclear, substance.
Yeah.
And what all that is and how damaging it is
Yeah.
to
There's-
life.
Yes. Now there's nuclear medicine. There's good uses of nuclear. So you can't just throw out nuclear altogether. But once you enrich plutonium, you're on the path. It's like taking up cigarettes and then the next thing is drugs. I mean,
Or whatever.
it's just, I don't, it's your, I mean, people have said this, when you're starting to be able to do this enrichment, then the next step isn't very far away. And so, I don't know, yes.
A couple things to close sort of. I want to thank you again for bringing this to our attention. And that brings me to another question that Clay Eels used to like to ask our local authors.
Yes.
Is what brought you to the Seattle area to do that maybe, or I don't know. And why did you decide to write a book?
Oh, that's a really good, first question is really good, and you might be interested in this because I've just become more aware of the Black Student Union and the Black sit-ins at the University of Washington. We just, at St. Mark's Cathedral, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the assassination of, come on people,
Martin Luther King.
Pratt, Edwin Pratt.
Oh.
He lived in Shoreline. He was just assassinated 50 years ago last week. And he was the head of the Black Student Union at Garfield and Franklin. And they sat in the University of Washington's offices and demanded not just black studies or integration, more presence of color on the campus, but women's studies as well. So President Odegaard was looking for someone to come and implement the response to those student requests. And my husband got the job.
Oh.
So he was brought here as the Dean of Undergraduate and Interdisciplinary Studies. And in our living room was formed Black Studies, Chicano Studies, Environmental Studies, and Women's Studies. They all had a very firm foundation in the academic departments. And you can see today, we now have a PhD program separate, an environmental PhD program that started in 1969. We have a women's studies program that is top in the country. Ethnic studies is now where all ethnic studies happen. Chicano and Black studies are now ethnic studies. And what was the third? Yeah, that's it. Those three programs are now strong PhD level programs. And so that's what he came to do. And he came with tenure in history. So even though he got fired from his administrative positions, he always was teaching history. Yeah. So, and then the second question, I have been a writer all my life. I have tons of memoir already written. And I thought I was all just worthless. And so I decided to go back to the University of Washington and take a little mini MFA in their professional school on literary fiction and on memoir. And I finished that a couple years ago. And this book came out of one of those studies that my professor asked to do. The study was describe a person who has had bad news without any knowledge of what that was. And so the first thing that came to my mind was Don was asked to make a speech on a big platform in the Tashkent University Square with probably several hundred people in the audience. And he had to, I could watch him, and he was fine, and then all of a sudden his just face got ashen, and he looked very anxious, and all this, the way he normally adjusting his tie and blowing his, he had all these mechanisms that I was very familiar with. And later I asked him, it was because he had heard that they were going to challenge our presence there on the basis of Reagan's evil empire speech. And he was going to have to respond to this. We came in it was a peace rally, right? And how can you say you're here from the United States on a peace rally when your president has just called us an evil empire? And he hadn't expected that when he first got on the stand, because our reception in Tashkent had been so warm and welcoming. And so that that little 2-paragraph study became this book. That, you know, you never know what's going to get you moving, and I thought this is a perfect, because that's really what happened. I'm at the end of the book, I'm an independent woman, right? My husband's died. So I had a business, and I was able to stand on my own 2 feet, which was partly because of all this work that I had been doing to learn how to meet the public and go out there and do my own thing. So
Do we have time for a commercial about your business?
that's okay. Well, I have a nutrition business. I represent the Shackley Corporation's
Oh,
products.
okay.
Yeah.
You've done that for a long
I
time.
have done it for 35 years, yeah. Yeah. I see some nodding heads, some of you know about Shackley. It's why I'm still standing at 81 years old. Otherwise I'd be on the floor with a thing on top of me.
Well, I trust that you will allow us to continue to ask questions as
Sure.
we might ask you to sign our books or
I'd
whatever.
love to.
And you've already introduced our book store.
Yes.
So again, let us thank you
Thank you.
and then
It was wonderful.
encourage people to
Yeah.
go ahead
Yes.
with more
Yeah.
questions
Stand and
personally.
move around.
Sit. And before anyone leaves, the library